14 to 17,000, the number of foreign national trafficked in the United States every year. Undocumented people that are coming across the border by force in a lot of cases. Or they think they're coming here to join their families, and as they're coming en route, the coyote that's bringing them across the border is forcing them into prostitution or the drug trade. Sometimes they'll come back to see their families. Most of the time, their families will have no idea where they are. 1,300, number 4 national victims of human trafficking certified by the Department of Health and Human Services. That number is from 2007. That's just the number that they found out about. That's the number of people that they were able to get help for. And then 1,300 is the number of T visas that were given out. Those are visas that are given out to victims of human trafficking. 244,000 American children and youth are estimated to be at risk of child exploitation. Now we're talking about U.S. citizens in this country that have been kidnapped, have run away, or their families are putting them into some sort of prostitution. Do we ever hear about that problem? 38,000 estimated number of an approximate 1.6 million runaway throwaways, youth at risk of sexual endangerment and exploitation in 1999. That number is a lot bigger now than it was. And here we have a little chart of how people are being exploited. 5% go into factories, 10% go into agriculture, 27 are put into domestic servitude, like being a maid or a housekeeper for somebody. 46% of the people are being forced into prostitution. Okay, here's a map that shows the routes that are being used into the United States. They're coming from all over the world, both coasts, coming up through Mexico. Once they hit the Texas, Arizona, New Mexico, California border, it's disseminated out all the way up everywhere in the United States. A typical path for somebody who's being put into the sex trade as they're coming across the border up into the eastern seaboard is they'll come across the border normally in Texas. Once they get across the border, they'll be put in a van or a truck and shipped over to Houston. In Houston, they'll be shoved into some sort of house, if you can call it that, where the truck that comes back from the eastern coast loads them up, and they'll be shipped up the eastern coast until they get dropped off to wherever whoever's going to be handling them. Yes, ma'am.
Does this stop at the Canadian border, or do we know, does it keep going?
Canada has its problems with it as well. It's harder to get numbers out of Canada on it, but we work closely with the Polaris Project, and I'll talk more about the Polaris Project here in a minute as we get through the presentation. But they're really the ones that turn Jeff and I into a lot of stuff that goes on with these girls. Got some pictures here of how people are smuggled across the border. In this picture right here, this is the dash of a pickup truck or some sort of suburban type. Notice they've hollowed it out and they've shoved 1 or 2 people into the front of the car. Here, they're disguised as seats. This guy here, how hot do you think your engine gets as you're running it, and yet they've shoved him into the engine there to try to get him across the border? Here we just kind of shove people into trucks. We close them up. Think about how hot it gets in Annapolis in the summertime. Well, think about the Texas, Arizona, New Mexico desert, and you're sitting in a closed box truck with no airflow. Here we just kind of lay people down as flat as we can into a van. Here we've got them underneath a Mack truck, and this is actually welded in so that it looks like it's factory made. So they are actually entombed in that truck as they're coming across. In the top pictures, and x-rays are coming across the border. Sometimes they'll x-ray trucks just check out the cargo, and that's the x-ray image. Here's an example of them laying flat in the bottom of a truck. Not sure how this person did that, but they're inside of a suitcase that was being brought across. And this is probably the most disturbing one because our cartels are so good that they got a van, they made up a government tag, and stole uniforms. Fortunately, this group was caught as they were coming across, but that's one way to get across. Who's going to question a government van in military uniforms? All right, here's some examples of recent stories that have happened recently. 10 suspects of human trafficking, December 22nd, 2013, Fox News reports this. 10 suspected traffickers who belong to an international network arrested in Mexico. 2 Indians, 5 in Bangladesh, 6 in the police are being held in unhealthy conditions, says the Attorney General's office. When we talk about unhealthy conditions, how many of you have seen pictures of chicken coops? Is that like the most filthy thing you can imagine? People are being shoved into houses just like that. Sometimes there's no electricity. Most of the time there's no electricity, there's no water. So there's no restroom facilities. Even if there was, they wouldn't be allowed to use them. But they're not, once they're brought in or they're getting ready to come across, they're not allowed out so the public can see them. When they come across the border, they're shoved into a little shack. No one can see them, because if people see them, then they'll know what's going on. So they hide them the best they can. They shove them in these trucks. It's the most unhuman conditions that you can imagine. Super Bowl just happened. This is an arrest that took place February the 4th. The news comes out. They had a huge prostitution ring was taking place up there. Happened the same in New Orleans last year as well. The minors rescued ranged from age 13 to 17, including high school students and children reported missing by their families. Some traffickers reported seeing 50 Johns a day. Had sex with 50 different guys in a day just so that somebody could make money off of it. These kids are not making money off of it. They don't keep in it, not a single penny, because everything goes to the person that's holding them captive. In the cases that we've had here in Annapolis, we see the same exact thing. We've seen girls that have serviced 50, 60, 70 guys in a day. How do we know that? Because they keep a logbook. Because they have to pay that money back to the guy that has the house. So when we go raid the house, we get the log books, we can tell what's been going on there today. Here's a story that came out last November on Channel 11.
Human trafficking experts warned a conference of school counselors today that thousands of young women in Maryland are at risk of being bought and sold for sexual exploitation. Last year alone, law enforcement identified 200 victims of human trafficking in our state, with 2 new cases brought to light just last night. 11 News IT reporter David Collins is live in Hanover tonight where the conference was held. David.
Well, Kate, experts say the issue is not new. It's just newly recognized as a problem. Up until last year, law enforcement viewed human trafficking as child abuse. Experts believe the line is blurred between prostitution and sexual slavery. The man in this surveillance footage is peeling off dollar bills to pay for a sex act. Leading authorities say young prostitutes like the one in the surveillance footage can be manipulated just as easily as a vulnerable teenage girl.
If you need more clothing. If you need somebody to pay attention to you because nobody at home is paying attention, then I will be that person for you. They promise them basically what they need and then exploit that by selling them.
Alicia McDowell is the executive director of Aramenta, an organization dedicated to the prevention and rescue of victims caught up in human trafficking. Aramenta is the birth name of Harriet Tubman. The organization trains counselors, teachers, and social workers how to identify signs of trafficking within student bodies.
Every presentation we have done, we've had somebody come up to us afterwards and say, I need to make a referral for a child who I believe is at risk.
Last year, Maryland authorities identified 200 children and young women as trafficking victims. Those being groomed suddenly have a wardrobe and no longer wear the same clothes to school. They sport jewelry and have cell phones and other electronics, material things they've never had before. Social media and online sites such as Backpage.com is where much of the recruiting begins.
The traffickers exert a lot of violence and control over the girls. They will threaten them, but they also are showing them love as well. It's very similar to a domestic violence situation.
In the most recently uncovered human trafficking case, Howard County Police say 32-year-old Craig Anderson regularly beat his victim into submission, transporting her to state for 2 years, forcing her to perform sexual acts on men.
It's not just that they are being held by physical chains, it's emotional and psychological chains, where that child might be experiencing an adult who is paying attention to them for the first time in their lives.
Those moved to want to help combat this problem are encouraged to consider supporting Run for Their Lives 5K race in Kingsville. For more information about that race and its cause, you can go to our website at WBALTV.com. Reporting live from Hanover, David Collins, WBAL TV 11 News.
We ever had this issue in the schools?
Yeah.
In case y'all don't know, we've got 3 newcomers here. They all work for the county schools. Yes, ma'am.
On the website, on these different websites that these people get on, advertising pictures of the kids, this and that, a lot of those those guys will look at the website itself. And also, you can find a lot of it on the job listings, such as the Craigslist.
Yeah.
And you answer this ad, and all the time, majority of the time, it's not a real job.
I've never been able to get anybody to respond to me. It sounds like you've had some success. But you're right.
Yeah, you answer an ad,
Yeah,
and you think it's a job,
right?
and it's not a job.
No, it's not. And unfortunately, these places like Backroom, Craigslist, they're all being set up. A lot of there's some legitimate stuff going on there, and there's a lot of stuff that's not legitimate on there. And there's all kinds of scams, and any scam you can think of, you can find on one of those 2 websites. So, back in 08, we had a homicide here. Detective Hartlove was in charge of that homicide. And at first glance, it looked like just somebody went up there and shot 2 people in a car. As he started working this, he started finding out that there was maybe some prostitution involved in it. Just like I thought in the beginning, he thought, well, this is prostitution. You know, these girls are in it because they want to be in it. As he started working this case, he started finding out that it was more of a slavery type situation instead of girls in it to make a couple bucks.
It took approximately 2 weeks to find out because of the community itself. And they were really, being the Hispanic community, they were really a close-knit community, and they didn't let out too much, but some of the community members did. There was a Hispanic liaison back then, Gus. He got out there, he got us those business cards. It's basically where we found out that they were prostitution business cards, and they were passing them out up at Jennifer's shop and things like that. That's what led us down to what's on the board is Madison Court area, 1009 Madison Court.
Those are the details of that, but